Cool. Okay, everyone, welcome to CSA Podcast. It's been a minute that we haven't been on here, but we haven't forgotten about you. Now, this particular topic is something that's definitely close to my heart. It's something I've invested a lot of time in trying to understand this and understand that there's so many different strands and nuances. Anyway, me and Ivan, we've been speaking about this for a while. And I also felt that maybe there's been a part of me that had been procrastinating this because I want to get this perfect. But it's all good. We just thought, let's keep it moving. And what we're going to try to do, we want to tackle this subject of the British identity. What does it mean? And we understand that to different people have a very different relationship with the British identity. And as me and Ivan have often explored in our many phone conversations, there's so many different sort of strands and perspectives and aspects to this conversation. So we're going to attempt to, over a couple of weeks, or should I say over a few episodes, we're going to try to tackle it at different angles. And again, making it clear that this is a subject that's, one, heavily nuanced. There is a lot of emotional attachment to some of this conversation. So really, rather than it being a conversation in which we feel we are the authority, it's more about merely opening conversation and giving people something that hopefully at the end of the conversation, you'll be asking newer questions that you can then go off with your own friends, with your family, your community, your peers, and just begin to explore even deeper. So I wanted to say that just to set the tone of the direction in which we're going to be heading. And with this topic around the British identity, the legacy of racism here in the UK, and many associated topics, we're going to enter. And we're going to enter with our first guest, Jack Yates, someone who I met just before lockdown in 2019. Jack, we kind of hit it off straight away. I met him and his brother at a debate event, I believe it was, where they just held lots of debates, and I kind of wanted to get more into public speaking. So anyway, I saw these two guys there. They were by the bar, if we're going to make it trendy, but it was just a little cafe.
I think they're selling crisps, aren't they?
Selling crisps, yeah.
Yeah, and bongo.
Yeah, and drink it in the Congo. And basically, we just started talking, and I think quite early on the conversation went quite intellectual, and I guess that was really our common ground for building. And we were speaking to the point that they missed their last train, I believe, on the way home. And fast forward a couple of years, and I think I'm just really honoured to have Jack as part of the guest of the CSA podcast. So if you're at home or listening on your phone, clap, make some noise. I can't see you, but I trust you're doing it. Excellent. Okay, Jack, welcome. How are you feeling?
Yeah, really good, Alex. I'm stoked to be here. I'm stoked to be talking to you guys. And yes, I think it's a really interesting topic, and no more so just coming out of the Jubilee, talking about British identity and what that means to people. I think it's very prescient time to be talking about it.
Yeah, totally. And when we speak about things around the legacy of racism, the British identity and people's relationship with it, often we're used to having a representation of different ethnic minority faces, which will naturally make sense at a very obvious level. But I think actually this conversation includes everybody at a different level. So particularly the reason why I chose you first as a guest for this project is because I was quite impressed with your story around, your interest in British history. And actually, I've got to say that even as a Black British-born male, the British history aspect of it was something that I had the least interest in. It's only as I've started to move forward in this topic, then I've begun to realize, okay, it's important to have some understanding of British history to give context to the wider conversation. So I think maybe at this point, it will be a good chance for you to really let us know a bit about yourself growing up. Where are you from? What was your interest? Yeah, what's your story?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you hit the nail on the head about interests. I've always been a real history boy, and I think it really stemmed from kind of relatively conservative parents that I had growing up. My dad was a policeman, and he kind of grew up under Thatcher. Very much would have defined himself as a child of Thatcher. Thatcher really looked after the police force, and I think him and his colleagues kind of really never forgot that. And I grew up in a conservative safe seat, so that come election time, there never really was any competition. Uh-huh. And my school, although it was a very working class school, quite a poor school, not a particularly good one, it was predominantly a white school as well. And then the other big factor in my life growing up was rugby. My dad was always a massive rugby fan, and I never really had a choice about whether or not I was going to play. And I played for a very white, very upper class rugby team, but rugby on the whole is a very white dominant sport. So in terms of my upbringing, it was, I mean, the consistent theme is it was very white. I didn't get many other perspectives. And I think as I get older, I realised that we were relatively not particularly well off, not super poor, but probably lower middle class sort of kind of area. And yeah, I guess the influence that this relatively wealthy rugby club we had that we went to had on us was we were sort of aspiring for more. And I think where history kind of interestingly comes into the equation is we're taught a version of British history where, you know, within living memory, Britain ruled most of the world, and it kind of plays into when you don't have loads going on in your life potentially, or where opportunities are limited. You can kind of look to that and be like, okay, well, you know, I might not drive the same car as the people I play rugby with. I might not go to these really high fee paying schools and things like that. But, you know, we have this shared collective history that sets us apart from other countries, other groups of people and things like that. And yeah, I guess you find what you're looking for in British history, and you kind of stick to that. And I think it's also very much reinforced into the British psyche as well, into schools and things like that. It's a convenient thing for the establishment to really play up, and as we've really seen during all of the Jubilee celebrations and things.
Interesting, because you said a couple of things that you mentioned. One point that I'm really interested in is you said when you don't really have much going on for you. Now, you're saying that now at the age that you are. Is that something you was aware of at the time, or did you just find it was almost like a default to just be interested in British history?
No, completely not. You know, I'm talking about when I was sort of, early teen years kind of thing, not aware of the world at all. The world is your limited experience in my Surrey upbringing, which is, a very, very conservative white place. So I had no real conception of the wider world. My understanding of British history was very cursory. I thought I knew way more than I did. I would read areas that I kind of wanted to, and I think we've had this conversation before where I subconsciously or very semi-consciously was aware of certain kind of uncomfortable topics that I would just ignore. I wouldn't go and read about them or learn more about them, and things that just didn't fit this narrative in my head that kind of fit the identity that I wanted to have. Sure. So it's kind of picking and choosing the bits that sit comfortably with who you want to be. And I think the British establishment, I think schools, the national curriculum, I think they do a really good, well, they would say a really good job. I think they do a terrible job of picking a good British history story to tell, but certainly the stories in our collective understanding of what British history is are all very much white dominated events that don't accurately tell a story of how we all came to be here. It's very skewed.
I mean, it's funny because in school, I just had no interest in history. I don't know, Ivan, was that the same for you? Because I know your schooling is much more, both of you, your schooling is much later than mine. But being in Royal Docks, being in a much more multicultural school and area, I mean, what was your experiences of learning about history in school?
Not a great deal. I'm the same. It didn't really appeal to me. It's so funny how you get older and suddenly it just becomes a thing, that this whole multiverse of all these different stories and the truth, etc. What was the favorite part of history or anything to do with history? It was about 5 foot tall. It was old as hell and it had wheels. It was called the TV when they rolled it in with a videotape. That was the best part of history for me, because everyone was like, oh yeah, we're going to watch a video. And it doesn't matter what it was just fab. So yeah, it wasn't a subject that I picked. It wasn't something that I was super into, but it was something definitely, I think what you were saying, where there were certain things that just didn't sit right. Like the whole history thing was a little bit sus. You know, you're hearing these narratives and these stories put to you, when I did hear them, and it was a little bit like
So even for you at your age, you were saying that you was questioning it as well, Ivan?
Yeah, I can't sit here and say that I know about a lot about, you know, Waterloo and all those different and all that, those sorts of things. Like I can't say that, but I think that just goes me personally, where I kind of like, I like to question things a little bit, and I think that just it always had just a strange air to it, of what was delivered anyway. But yeah, to answer the question, history was never a big thing for me. A little bit more so when I got older. But
that's funny, because now I'm listening to you both, but particularly what you just said there, Ivan, and I cannot think, because I just decided I didn't like history. I didn't engage with the topics. I didn't necessarily engage with the teacher, although the teacher wasn't necessarily bad. So I didn't even take in any information to even allow myself to even question what was being taught. But one of the things that I did want to say, like from Jack, from your perspective, you mentioned that there were certain things that you were starting to see, and you kind of maybe in your own sort of way just brushed over certain topics. When you had this interest in British history, did it ever filter into your social? So, for example, if we're talking about your peers in rugby, were you ever discussing these kind of things that you've learned together and discussing British history together? And the other part of the question would be, if they ever hit any of those kind of grey areas, how was that kind of negotiated in a social setting?
Yeah, no. Interestingly, the people that I would have my like historical interests with, and who really drove them were kind of my dad and my dad's friends,
Right,
who are all kind of white dudes of a certain age who. All grew up. Well, I mean, I think they were probably all policemen as well, which like just makes them kind of like a really undiverse group of people.
Right.
And yeah, when I think back on like some of the things they would say, that they would just wouldn't be inaccurate. They were so patriotic, so nationalistic. And you know, it's interesting. Ivan, when he just pointed to a historical event, you know, it was a really famous British victory that is just, when you talk about the things that people are aware of, it's the victories, and it's the First World War, it's the Second World War, it's Waterloo, it's Agincourt, it's Crécy. I mean, people would probably know the Battle of Hastings because of the car insurance advert, but I mean, you know, technically that's one that we lost, but people probably wouldn't know
Just remember that. Yeah.
So you know, we're great at telling all the stories of all the times we won, and you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that, you know, your experience, both of your experiences about being apathetic about history. What a great way of not kind of teaching people properly and educating them to kind of be a bit angry about how we've behaved in the world, and understanding how other countries perceive us and how we treat different groups within our society, and how we can see why that's the case. You know, if you just teach a really boring version of history that doesn't appeal to different subsections of society and just completely alienate them, leave it so there is no understanding and there is no kind of connectedness to why we're all here. If you just make everyone apathetic, then that's great as well. Like that just pushes them out of that space altogether. So, you know, the true story of how we all came to be is so much more interesting because it's so much more human. The story that we're taught about just Britain winning everything and conquering the world, and there's no nuance to that at all. You know, that's dead boring, because the only explanation for that is like exceptionalism, which isn't the case, obviously. So.
And I think what that then plays into is this idea of excellence that people kind of run with, even though that excellence isn't reflected in their own everyday life. You know what I mean? And so it just becomes this fantasy that people can hold on to, run with, protect. But actually, it's almost like, yes, okay, I get it, but how is this filtering into your life? Does your life spell this very same excellence that you seem to want to celebrate? You know, which is dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I saw that in Leeds when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and you know, you saw equally well-attended counter-protests of people thinking that we wanted to destroy a statue of St. George in like Leeds city centre, and you know, a friend and myself, two white guys just walking home, we had two placards just like supporting the BLM movement, and you know, we were chased by a load of guys because they thought we wanted to like tear down something, and you know, we weren't near a statue, we didn't have any kind of tools to be tearing anything down, and you know, it's such an emotive topic that it really, people connect to that British identity, and if it's threatened in any way, you know, and you're backed into a corner, it's terrifying for people, and you see that egregious crimes being committed because people feel that identity that they connect so strongly with, because it's so kind of, there's not many stories in living history that you can, this story that I can't really see because my screen's too nervous, but I'm doing inverted commas.
Yeah.
This,
You're going to have to do it like
story,
this.
yeah, sorry. This story of British exceptionalism, that is just so, I don't know, it's such a half story.
No, sure. Okay, so when me and you had spoken, and particularly when I first met you, I remember us having a conversation. I think this conversation was had via more WhatsApp text. And I remember bringing certain things to your attention. And at the time when we'd raised this up, I felt maybe there were certain aspects that maybe hadn't been understood based on what I was presenting to you. However, over the time, there's been a lot of trend. I've seen a massive kind of shift in kind of your insight, and clearly that insight has come from you going away and really putting two and two together. When we spoke about this, what I took from that is that you, because of your traveling and where you'd been and who you'd met, it was really starting to kind of map out some thought processes for you. So I kind of want us to talk about that really, because you've been in different parts of the world and you've lived in certain parts of the world. So maybe first of all, talk a little bit about where you've been and your experiences, and then maybe talking about how that's informed the evolution of your thought process.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess we kind of left the story when little Tory Jack was kind of 18, I suppose. And I just never really had a kind of anything to kind of like shake that bubble or like burst that bubble. And when you start building an identity, you're not really looking for things to destroy it or to challenge it with. You're looking for things to reinforce it. And I've always been quite an anxious person, so I've tried to like reinforce myself with knowledge and facts to like back up who I am and how I behave and that kind of thing. So you feel almost like a reassuring hug from the establishment when you buy into the official narrative.
Sure.
And you know, it's a collective one as well. There's lots of other people that feel that way. And when you're standing on the Mall and the Queen's like driving past and everyone's waving their flags and stuff, it's like, yeah, I'm amongst friends and shared values. It's nice. It's a nice experience.
Yeah.
So yeah, as someone who is anxious and doesn't make friends too easily, then yeah, like those kind of experiences are really like comforting. But yeah, move on. I started traveling a fair bit. I won a scholarship to go and work in India in, it would have been 2017, 2018, that kind of time. And you know, India's only been independent for 70 years. Still, for a lot of people in like British occupied India, still in living memory. And you can really like sense the British influence there. And a lot of the British Empire was built on, you know, it wasn't built on force of will. A lot of it was done at gunpoint, but a lot of it was kind of ruled by just kind of fake it till you make it, like confidence. Like there wasn't a huge occupational force in a lot of places. So Britain had to create this narrative that it was exceptional and that white people had a divine right to rule. And then that had to be bought into by enough people for that to be realistic. And you know, when you go back over there, you still see that that is still exemplified. You know, I was there as a journalist. I was writing stories about, there was a farming crisis going on at the time, still very much unsolved, so still going on. And I would have local politicians, village elders, that kind of thing, asking me questions about bureaucracy and administration in their towns and things, and as though I knew better than they did when I was like,
right.
Not too long out of university, didn't have a clue. And they talk so highly of British occupation and British rule in India, and say how a lot of educated people who've been to university, who are MPs or regional governors, saying like things were better under British rule. And it was a real eye opener that these people hadn't had almost their bubbles burst and hadn't kind of come, like if you tried to come at it from a different perspective with them, they're just kind of, I guess that their heels are sort of dug in. So that was an interesting.
But then how did you respond to that bit of information? Because, I mean, because surely for someone who wanted that affirmation of being proud, that would reinforce it, but it seems like it kind of done the opposite for you. So why was that?
Yeah, I mean, before I went out to India, I just bought loads of. I was really kind of. It was a real, I guess, black area of my knowledge that I didn't know very much about British occupation in India. Something I really wanted to learn more about, and the more I read into it, like I had a few different books. One was just kind of like a history of Britain in India, like a nice welcoming title. Read that, and then there was another one, and it was called like it was something that was really kind of like negative towards Britain. I can't remember the title, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure about that. Not like felt a little bit kind of that might have shaken me up a bit too much, but I kind of built myself up to that. And then when you read it, it's just like, I don't know, you feel a bit ashamed that you haven't been well read enough, and you
Right.
don't know enough, that you hold these prior views that are just kind of like, objectively wrong. And a lot of that, I guess it's like a house of cards, isn't it? And then suddenly just like things start falling away, and you're like, well, if this was the case here, let's read about some other places. And it's suddenly everything that you thought made sense doesn't really make sense in the way that you thought it did, and there's far more nuance to it.
So would you say then, would it be fair to say that maybe your pride in knowledge is probably more stronger than your pride in culture, in a sense that, because I say that only because you said you felt a little bit ashamed that you didn't know as much as maybe you thought you ought to. So I'm guessing maybe that it was more important to you to know about something than to just feel a certain way about something.
I definitely, I think I value knowledge over most things, to be honest. And I think you kind of have to let the facts. You have to follow the facts. And I think when I was younger, I probably thought I was a lot cleverer than I was. So I definitely thought I was a lot cleverer than I was, and would stick with a narrative and then just kind of like blindly fight that case, because if I lost that argument, then that meant I wasn't smart. So don't worry about the facts, just win the argument, kind of thing. And then the more you read, the more you realize you realize you don't know. And the more you read, the more you realize it's a lot more complicated than kind of you're taught in school.
Sounds like a few people need a few more scholarships to India. Like, I think like we're going to need everyone in London to get a scholarship. Is that saying, isn't it? Don't ask me where I studied, ask me where I traveled. And that really does open up your horizon for thinking. Because again, like you were saying, when those elders and people coming up to you asking you questions, it's like that's a big shock. Because in London or wherever you live, you just don't expect someone from the town, people who run the community, to come up to you and start asking you those same questions. So it's quite bizarre.
I mean, Ivan, for you, like, because you're in London, but you're not originally from London. Has that journey and your kind of, when you've had the chance to be exposed to cultural diversity, has it impacted your, your perception of yourself within the British context, or did you even have that in the first place?
Yeah, I've other than my mum working in the hospital, and she would drag us drag us in a horrible way, but you're younger, you didn't want to do anything with your parents, but she would take us to the hospital, and there would be a lot of elderly there, and they would celebrate VE Day and loads of different things. And my mum would go to great lengths of like making sure there was different colored jellies, but they were always like something to do with the flag, the British, anything to do with like Britain. And they would play old radio songs and stuff like that. And for me, that was super alien. Like it should have been something that I just thought was, I just did it because it felt normal. But I remember it never sat right with me. It was always just really unusual. So I've never been massively connected to the whole kind of although I live it through my parents doing the activities they do. I'd never been super connected to that whole British sort of thing. And I think the things that stood out to me the most, I think it was just the general inequity of just people in general made it stand out more of what was actually going on. And I think that's one story that I remember that kind of shocked me a little bit was I was on a bus, the 473 going down Prince Regent Lane. Mm-hmm. The bus driver was sitting in the car, and there was an African family on the bus. Now, they looked fresh. They looked like they'd not been in the country for very long. They had all their stuff with them, and they were clearly very lost. they were saying to the bus driver and for help, and because I think what they were asked the gentleman where do we get off, and they were trying to get the heads up, like, is it here, sort of thing. And one of them kind of made a sound that you could, I don't know, if someone was being jibing an African person, they would almost, it was just them talking normally, but someone who wanted to jibe them could latch on to that. And the bus driver just started making like African sounds to these people.
No way.
I'm on the bus and I cannot believe it. I'm just like, and I think this is the root of what I'm trying to get at, is that it was the inequity of those people not being treated normally that kind of like bugged me. And it was like, whether this completely connects to the original question, but it was more the case that he started doing that, and something within me was just like, I can't put up with this. Like, this cannot happen any longer. And I remember as the guy let me off the bus, he opened up the doors, and I was like, dude, you're a racist, whatever. I was like, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, like what the hell are you doing to these people, sort of thing. And this guy just loses his absolute mind. He starts like banging on the glass, almost to the point where his bus nearly drives into the central reservation because he's not looking. And I was I was a bit ballsy, and I just said to him, I said, mate, if you step out that cab, your job's done. I was like, you're fired. The moment you step out that cab, sort of thing. And I was giving it to him. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like just through general inequities of people in general, I think those moments that I see on a daily, weekly basis kind of pulled me out of the kind of illusion of what Britain is to some extent, and that inherent kind of like, I deserve this. This is, you're here in my town, sort of thing. And I think as it's gone on, I've not been able to sit into those kind of the culture that is Britain because of those things that I'm seeing every day that just don't match with my values. So I think that I don't know if that sums up your question, but that's the best example.
Totally. What you've just done is you've given yourself an example in life, and for you, what the relationship with being British was about for you is you want to see how that plays out in society. And actually, some of the examples you referred to was like, well, if this is what it represents, I'm not about that life because I don't speak that language. And that totally makes sense. Okay, so then if I slide back to Jack for a second, you also went somewhere else, if I'm correct, somewhere in Africa. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I went out to India, I was, as I said, a journalist, and I was working for a farming magazine.
Yeah.
And then I decided to leave there, and wanted to get my traveling shoes on again. So I did some volunteering through a government charity called VSO, and I went out to work in Tanzania for about 4 months. And involved with that was basically living with a local family, which was absolutely incredible. A really like humbling experience. People with, compared to Western standards, absolutely nothing, who were happier than anyone I'd ever met in Surrey, and celebrated life every day. And really, I think it was a combination of that, and going out there and reading some really I think with every big turn in my mindset, there's always been like a really good book as well that's kind of helped me along that way. I think the book that stands out in Tanzania was Down and Out in London and Paris by George Orwell, a book about what it's like to be poor, and that kind of combination with what my conception of poor was in the UK and what poor can actually be, and how that's manufactured, and how people, when I say it's manufactured, how perceptions of poor people are manufactured, and how poor people can be vilified. And I grew up with programs like Benefit Street and Jeremy Kyle and things like that. And, essentially someone in an ivory tower somewhere is doing an equation on the subsection of society that needs to be alienated, and to be hated enough for whoever's in charge to win an election. And, I've become a real cynic about kind of most of society's problems are just come down to a sum about who's the group of people that we need to alienate enough that enough people will buy into that and will get behind that. So someone can cling to power and stay wealthy at the end of the day. And that was really on show in Tanzania. Incredible corruption there, from the state and from the church. And so that was another really pivotal moment in my life, coming back from there. Also, soon as I came back, I moved to Leeds, far more multicultural place to live than I've ever lived in my life. My best friend was a person of color. And it just kind of, that started reinforcing everything and challenging beliefs in a way that it never had before. And
Wow.
yeah, I think for me, it's a really painful process when you kind of unpick who you thought you were and what you thought you believed in. And it's a very kind of humbling process and you feel really vulnerable. But I guess it's the only kind of genuine way to move forward. You can just dig your heels in and stay as the person that you thought you were, and only get so far. Or yeah.
I mean, Jack, I really like how you've picked out certain words like painful and vulnerability. And the reason why I say that is because I think a massive part of this conversation that kind of gets lost is the emotional content. Because what often happens is we do the academics. So if you're someone that's read books and studied it, then there's an academic argument that goes on, and then it's about who knows more and who can present what they know better. And then you have the stats argument. So if someone's done research on stats, then you have the stats argument, and whose stats is more valid, who knows more about stats and stuff like that. But what kind of lacks, I think, in this conversation across the whole board is the emotional content. And the only time emotional content is really acknowledged is from the concept of people who are trying to raise an issue. They're kind of seen as, why are you getting emotional for? Why are you getting emotional? It doesn't fit the logic. It doesn't fit the academic logic that we're presenting. Why? However, what you're speaking about right now is also the emotional content from the other side of now the process of beginning to know new information that challenges everything that you've built your foundation on. And the reason why I just wanted to highlight that, particularly for people listening, is to understand that actually the emotional aspect of this conversation, I believe, is very huge, is very underestimated, and also there is always an emotional story to navigate and understand on all sides of the arguments, whether you're someone that's for something or whether you're against something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And just to add on to your point, I think a lot of that's tied to British identity. The stiff upper lip is something that we're constantly told, take as much shit as, sorry, I don't know if we can swear on this podcast. But
run it. Yeah.
People are told constantly to just accept worse and worse conditions, but it's a real sign of strength that, if you work harder or you get your head down and it's all linked to basically this wartime blitz spirit, which in itself didn't even really exist or exist in the sense that it's popularly believed. So I think it all links into like these actually quite pernicious values that is forced upon working people, that they're supposed to seek pride and gain pride from these things that ultimately only benefit people on the top of the chain anyway. So
yeah, it's like that whole resilience thing, isn't it? It's like stiff upper lip, work really hard, do 70-hour weeks, like you're saying during the blitz, every time a siren goes off, run downstairs and hide. It wasn't as beautiful and romantic as they make it. But I've seen something recently, I really like the concept on where someone was saying about resiliency and about being more resilient. They were like, no, fuck resiliency. I don't want to be more resilient. Just stop treating me like an arsehole and stop making everything that we do, like you were saying, there's a lot of things that are created to make it harder for poorer people and stuff. No, just stop making it harder for everyone. Make it easier, make it more, just make it better for people. That whole resilience thing, you do get resilient, of course. But if someone's punching you in the face, just stop punching me in the face.
But this is the thing, and resilience, is that really a cultural identity, or is it just an attribute of a human being? I mean, is it exclusive to British? Can not someone that's born in Iceland be resilient? Can't someone that's been born in Brazil be resilient? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think when the kind of the establishment talks about resilience, it's kind of like resilience in silence almost. The silent suffering person who works really hard and you don't hear anything from them, and it's just like, be passive, don't go on strike, don't go and the drop of a hat, the French public will ground the whole country to a standstill. They won't take change, and that's not always for the better, but they're a different national psyche where they are a check against the establishment, and whether that's come from them having a revolution and cutting the aristocracy's head off or whatever. But we never really had that massive shift in our societal structure. And
do you think it's happening at the moment? What do you both think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to think it's happening, but how much worse can things get? How much higher can prices get? How much can wages stagnate? How much corruption can we put up with? We're putting up, as a society, we're putting up with an ungodly amount that I know for a fact, like somewhere like France, absolutely wouldn't put up with.
Right.
And so, what is our breaking point? Are we at a point where, as a society, we're so overworked that we don't have time and the mental kind of capacity to go and do that? Have we been ground down economically so much that we don't have the means, or we can't afford to go on strike? Are we, it's all these questions. Over lockdown, I've become a bit of a pessimist, really, about the state that we're in, because you get normalized to all of the background like shit, really. And I mean, I remember growing up. I remember Tony Blair got in trouble once because I think someone was driving his Renault Megane in the congestion zone and hadn't paid properly or had registered his car wrong. And people were saying, like, oh, is he going to resign? Like that was the bar then. And now you look at the bar now.
You can go raving.
Yeah, look at the whole Trump scenario. Look at at Trump, everyone's waiting for the next worst thing for him to do. And it's like, no, he's done enough for you to make a decision for yourself to know that he's a piece of shit. But everyone's waiting for those weird, bizarre scenarios. A bit conspiracy theorist. I wonder if the government have got to the point where they have just worked out, here's a bar graph, and they can look at it every day and they're like, how far can we push these buggers? And if we do go over that line, these are the sets of things that we're going to do to make sure that it doesn't go any further, if that makes sense. I know it's like a spooky kind of lockdown, like similar to what China's doing right now with the whole COVID thing, where they're literally welding people into their houses. They're doing some dystopian weird stuff where they're flying drones through the street, playing national anthems and stuff like that.
But see, this is the thing though, Bob. I mean, you say conspiracy, but I don't really think that's so conspiracy, because again, we're talking about the British identity. I mean, one of the things that I feel, and I mean, again, I'm not going to go down this, but I'll just say it in context of what you said, is one of the things when you make people's identity, so we're sold this idea of an identity that doesn't really exist. When people don't have an identity, they can easily be manipulated. There's been many points in the conversations where both of you referred to things which really boils down to a sense of manipulation. And I feel like what then happens is, when you don't have a base in which you're clear on where you're going, things that are presented to you, you would emotionally react to it, but then you would then just get carried on with your day because you're so used to suppressing. And I think the culture of suppression is super, super high here in the country. And I really believe that we won't see change here until there's an emotional awakening, because I feel like at the moment we're very good at numbing our senses. So from a British perspective, one of the massive accepted numbers is drink, but we celebrate the drinking culture. We celebrate that when we're going out, we're going to drink excessively, and that is the bar for having a good night. We're not really thinking about all the different aspects of what coming together with your mates, sharing stories, having a laugh, sharing some challenges, and then working it out together. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about coming together and knocking some drinks down our throat. To me, that right there that deserves going to sit down with a therapist. If I'm honest with you.
Yeah, we all need to line up to a huge therapy office and just go in one by one. Or we'll just have a huge town hall, But
the thing is, it's not to say that drink is bad for you. But what I'm saying is that the aspiration is to knock yourself out with drink, which is different from actually celebrating with some alcohol. And so it feels like when the government knows its people at that place, it's almost like they know they can almost say things that's going to get some resistance, but then you're going to get on with your day the next day.
But yeah, the thing that shocked me the most recently, the government have done all weird things in terms of stealing money with PPE, giving contracts to friends, and doing all these things. And then Partygate is absolutely riling people up something rotten. And so it should, without a shadow of a doubt. But if I kind of lay out a list of priorities in front and I'm like, okay, I've got 10 things I'm really pissed off about here, but I'm going to tick a few of them off. the Partygate was horrible, terrible. Like, people didn't get to spend time with their parents dying. And if I was in those boots, maybe I'd even be a little bit more pissed off right now about that. But when you see the whole nation rallying around the fact that they had a couple of drinks and pints and stuff in a room somewhere, which is, again, it's a bad thing. But then the whole that they're like ripping off us at any point that they can, stealing all the money that people have like worked hard for. It's just quite unusual the way that as a society we pick and choose of what people get really pissed off about. And I even see it in groups of friends. Like, I see people with some of the things that they get pissed off about, and they're like, "Oh, I can't believe Boris did that. He's such a prick." And I'm looking at him and I'm like, "But you know, he did this, this, and this." And they're like, "Oh yeah, he did that as well, didn't it?" I just find it so unusual when I see people, the way that the things that people, like you say, the emotion that people get riled up about. I do find it quite interesting. I'm not acting like I'm a special breed or something, but the things that I find obvious, I don't feel like the people around me do necessarily. But that might just me being special. But it's so funny how that just the way people get riled up about certain things. We could do with a common goal, couldn't we? Where we're all like, guys, like, we know you want to build this new train line, you know, you want to do this, but as a country, we've decided we wanted to do this. So can we maybe do that another time and just focus on what we need to do? But that whole idea that we have no focus other than going to work and working 70 hours a week. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's right. Okay, so then moving that forward, I mean, Jack, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the barriers to holding these sorts of conversations?
So, yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers is this kind of manufactured space where people have less and less personal time, that people are having to work harder to keep their heads above the water financially. And I don't think that's like, that there are global factors that contribute to that, but I think that is a way of maintaining power and influence over the majority of people. Defunding education and things like that means that people don't ask more questions and don't question themselves. And I think a lack of free time, and like you said earlier, Alex, people, when they do get free time, one of the nation's most popular things to do is to go out and just get obliterated. So yeah, all of that kind of together doesn't leave you a lot of space to sit and think about yourself and where you fit into the equation, what your values are. Do your values kind of dovetail in with the national values that are kind of propagated to us and offered up to us in media headlines and on the news every night and that kind of thing. So, I think an individual identity can also be, from personal experience, a real vulnerability, whereas a collective identity there's a lot of safety in it. So, what's going to push you to go down that route and try and develop that more when you're in a community, a friendship group or something that you feel really safe in, that you're kind of thriving in, and there's nothing immensely wrong in your life, other than all of the terrible things going on at the moment. So
sure.
Yeah, there has to be a catalyst, I think, and I think things like BLM started great conversations and things like that, but what's your individual catalyst? Is it Ivan seeing something happen on a bus that fundamentally changes your worldview? If you don't have those experiences, when you were telling that story, Ivan, I was thinking to myself, like, would I have had that experience in my very white town with my very white mates? Would I have reacted the same way? Because I don't think anyone I know would have challenged that.
Interesting.
To some people that might not. That might be a normal thing, or you might share the views of the bus driver. You have to have that person. You have to have the you there to challenge that, to be like, wow, okay, like that's something that's not acceptable.
I think that's a good point, because I know, Ivan, you're the type of person that you have, from the time I've always known you, even though you're not necessarily aggressive, you've always stood up for what you thought was right, even if it meant going against the grain, so to speak.
I always do it whenever I can, and it's more the case. I feel like what you were saying about just having some self-reflection and just having values. And there's a few values, I couldn't list them off; they're internal, but that I kind of live by. And it's how you've got a certain amount of energy that you can exert in a day, and you just got to try and find a way, choose the things you put it on, and just again be mindful of the things that are going on around you. So, and also because I actually don't think it's as hard as people think to just look out for one another. And that's mainly what I try and do. And it's actually helped me. So Yeah. The only thing I would say, the last thing I wanted to mention is just, I think just in Britain in general, if you're born in a small town and you're at school and you're surrounded by people that that are doing certain things, I think similar to what you were saying, Jack, where it's easier to just go with the grain with what's going on. If there isn't things in society that are pushing you to go against the grain, and I think I love the idea of you. I think one of the things we mentioned is you traveling and seeing certain things and being introduced to things that took you out of your comfort zone. But like you finish college and you need a job, you're in a particular town and someone says, hey, come work with me. I've got some great lads who there. We have a bit of banter, we get on with each other, and all of a sudden you're working there. Next thing you know, you've been there 20 years and there's no diversity of thought. There's no one in the higher ups who are leading by example of how you should treat people. And I think that is like an epidemic across everywhere right now, is that the people that you look up to, and we've covered this a lot on the podcast about role models, about people you see doing certain things, and the idea that with identity, for us to try and act different is difficult, whereas us acting like everyone else is a lot easier. So it's easy just to be you might be a square, but you can fit into a circle with that particular group. It's hard to then be a square, it's hard to then do that elsewhere where you go against the grain. So that's kind of the general gist that I'm getting from this, my conclusion of this conversation anyway.
Yeah. Sure. Go on, Jack. Can you say something?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up and say that I'm very aware of my privilege in being able to go and do all that traveling and be able, like, it's not accessible and it's not the answer for the majority of people.
For sure.
So it's what's the solution to a majority of people, and I think it's as I've said, like trying to bring a mainstream narrative in, and I think groups like the national football team do an amazing job of kind of challenging narratives. They go and get booed kind of every time they play, but they stick to their guns because they know what's right, and they know like that will challenge people in ways that no kind of school book or politician standing like saying this is what we should be doing will do. It's a mainstream narrative of people that kids look up to, and it will start a conversation. Why are they kneeling? Like, what's that all about? That's such a great way of opening up the conversation, and people with a platform have such a responsibility to be doing that.
In terms of the football, it's an interesting thing that's happening at the moment, because in recent games, England haven't been doing so well and they have been getting booed. And so what tends to often happen is, apart from, any of the strategy talks and the technical conversations, maybe all of these sorts of cultural diversity that can become an issue for some people as a point of blame. But the bit that I wanted to say was, I think where Britain have got a bit of a challenge around these conversations, and how this gets navigated, I don't know, is there is a massive cultural void at the moment around the idea of what being British means. And I definitely think within the white community, there is a massive void about understanding what does it mean to actually be white. And so what happens is historical leaders of an empire, leaders who often have the biggest platform, actually have the least to bring to the table when it specifically comes to identity. And the concept of identity is very different. So, for example, in some nations, religion is a massive driving force which dictates the way people live. So with religion, there's like lots of ideas around the way people think, the way people approach things. In some places, there's strong ancestral connection. In often modern countries like England and others around, say, northwestern Europe, modern living science is often what dictates. So people's perception of identity is different. So some people feel proud of being in a country like England because we live modern. We've got good water system, we've got good houses, we've got cars, we've got everything. But that actually isn't culture, that's just science. That's just having the privilege to live in. So I think as soon as you enter these conversations, people's perceptions of what identity means is different. And I think for most of us, we don't actually take the time to think, okay, before I'm going to get into this argument, what do I know? What do I understand? What do I think? So people go along with the idea that talking about British identity means that I'm attacking British history, which, yes, there is part of that. It's attacking the narrative we've been sold, but actually, this is also a time for people to begin to fill those voids that maybe have existed. Because now we can actually look at this and think, okay, well, let's write it. Let's decide to define what our identity is. I don't know if that makes sense.
Like you said, Alex, if people decide that they're proud to be British and they buy into British values and things like that, if you've made your mind up on that, you can find anything and attribute that to, oh, it's because I'm British, or because, you know, this discovery was made because they were a British person, or we're a first world country, we're one of the 10 biggest economies in the world because we are British, and because, you know, that is linked to like something in our DNA or something, you know, obscene like that. And that's very much how I was growing up. You know, it's you've made your mind up and then you go and find the evidence. And, you know, if you ask the scientists that, you know, it's the other way around, isn't it? You follow the science, you follow the evidence, and then you come to your conclusion based off of that.
What's been presented to you. Yeah.
So maybe
go on.
I was just going to say, maybe we need to be more clinical, you know, and lay everything out on the table. It's in the establishment's interests to put you in a silo, but, you know, read widely, listen to people you disagree with, and just formulate things based on, be really clinical and formulate things based off a wide variety of evidence.
Well, yeah, we talked about it the other day on our live stream, and one of the cool things that I've picked up recently is just when you have a conversation, just look at the facts as data. Don't attach the emotion to it. Collect all the data you want, and don't try and make a decision or a conclusion at that moment. Take it with you. You know, when you're washing the pots, be like, oh man, actually that kind of makes sense. And then you start to see things in society and around you, and you're like, okay, that's making more sense. That maybe I can give that a little bit more forethought. But see it as data, like remove the emotion. But I get it; it's in the best interest for us to be, like you said, siloed. But you know, yeah.
Okay, well then, do you know what? I'd like to throw out a closing remark for everybody. Give me one point, one suggestion that you think would help people engage in more productive and more progressive conversations around the legacy of British identity. What would be that one suggestion?
I've got one. I don't know if I can exactly. I just think I'm not sure about the British identity thing, but I just think in general, I think one thing we've worked out in this conversation is that people are not comfortable with debating and having actual conversations, and a lot of the times it gets too emotional before there's any chance to actually have anything fruitful from a conversation. So one cool thing that we do that we talked about in the job I do in human resources is about and the whole diversity of thought is grabbing people at like lunch breaks that you wouldn't normally talk to, and just having a conversation with that person and learning about them. And, you know, lunch is a good one because sometimes you might be sitting next to someone who's not got a ham sandwich. They might have a biryani. They might have something else. And all of a sudden you could be like, oh, so what the hell is that? You know, where's that come from, sort of thing? You know, I wouldn't normally have something like that. And then all of a sudden that conversation happens. So I would say start putting yourself in environments where you're a little bit uncomfortable and you're asking people questions, and literally do that. Ask people questions, don't tell them, ask them questions, and you'll be so surprised at what you learn.
Jack, what are you saying?
Yeah, I completely agree with Ivan's point. I think debating can be really confrontational, and, you know, the very nature of the word means that you're kind of coming at things from two different perspectives, and you just kind of want to win for some arbitrary, I don't know, internet points or something. I beat you in the debate, now I'm better, whatever. Like, it's so stupid. So I would say, you know, don't look to argue with people. Look to listen. Learning to listen is like something that a skill that I think a lot of people don't have. A skill that I definitely didn't. Well, I'm working really hard on. You know, while someone's talking, don't think about what you're going to say in response. Just understand their perspective. And I think a big thing is challenge your own perspective. You could be wrong, and, you know, there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's growth. That's learning. So just constantly check yourself. If you think the sky is blue, still look outside the window every day and just make sure, because you could be wrong. And if you're wrong about that, you could be wrong about other things as well. So I think I said two things there. I cheated, but yeah.
That's okay, Bob. You're gonna have to give us a little £5 thing. No, but no, what you said is it's very important, and I think my closing thoughts would be a bit similar to what you said there, Jack. Listening, but more. But I would say listen to yourself, because I think as well, people enter into these sorts of conversations and they don't check in with themselves, and so what happens is, although we would consciously deny our emotional state, everything we do is coming from an emotional place. So if people feel attacked, they don't want to get involved. If people are feeling a bit afraid and vulnerable, they don't want to get involved. Now, you mentioned earlier on a couple of times in conversation, I think Ivan did as well, the idea of coming together, the camaraderie, that culture. And what I've learned is, so camaraderie is something that's, I think for humans generally, we love it, but in British culture, it's definitely a strong attribute. And I believe that when people have had a new piece of learning, or when people have achieved a bridge between each other where they've come from two different places and somehow they've come together and begin to understand each other, there's so much of a good feeling in camaraderie that comes out of that, where you're like, oh man, I get you. And so I would also say, why would you deny yourself the opportunity to build bridges which you didn't even know existed, just because you was too afraid to listen to something that actually feels a little bit alien to you? You know, which I think this kind of intertwines with what both of you are saying, but that's my final point right there.
All right, that seems like a great way to end the episode. I think we covered some really good points there. If anyone had any thoughts on what we talked about today, wherever you're listening to this, and if the option's there, leave a comment, spark that debate with someone, that conversation with someone, and we'll keep our eyes on it as well, and try and fill in our thoughts as well. Alex, anything else you want to close with? Anything you want to say?
Yeah, I think you've said everything right there. And at this point, I just want to say thank you, Jack, for coming through and sharing your thoughts and kind of kicking off this series of conversations around the British identity. We hope to tackle some other aspects of it, but Jack is our first guest. So thank you for sharing your stories, and I hope you've enjoyed your time with us.
No, definitely. Thank you so much for having me, and you guys are doing awesome work and talking about some really, really important issues. So I hope you do get lots of debate and lots of comments and things. And yeah, all power to you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
See you later.
Be yourself. Nice one.